For more on this, let's bring in the Managing Director of ClearView Energy Partners, Kevin Book. Kevin, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Great to be with you, Rich.
So I'd like to start with what Lucas just mentioned there. They're all the oil executives who were at the White House this past week. The president wants $100 billion in investment in Venezuelan oil infrastructure. Do you think he's going to get it anytime soon?
Well, anytime soon is probably the operative question. So the way the executives are likely to look at this is they're going to think about their risk-adjusted return on invested capital. And before they make that investment of that capital, they're going to want to understand what the risks are and what the returns look like. Some of that involves going to the country, understanding the state of affairs. Some of that involves understanding what the United States is going to do to protect or encourage their investments.
Now, part of that, of course, is perhaps this what Lucas was talking about, that any prior judgments or legal action, that the oil revenue would be protected from a legal action, from any previous claims. And then maybe, I don't know, loan guarantees. And what can the administration do? What kind of assurances can the administration deliver to try to get some of that investment into Venezuela?
Well, so to the first point, the president's executive order is designed to get money flowing into Venezuela without all the claimants for all the past expropriations and corporate issues that have come up, claims against Venezuela getting that money and preventing the reconstruction or the new investment. It also means it's free and clear probably of sanctions because the executive order said that other executive orders don't apply to the money that comes from the sale of proceeds. But on the other hand, then there's the question of whether or not there is a federal government way to backstop or support investment. The president said during his meeting with the oil executives that he hoped he didn't have to use a backstop, but there may be loan guarantee authorities or other mechanisms that could be brought to bear.
What kind of shape is the Venezuelan oil industry in?
Well, there's two phases really to think about. The first is debottlenecking and repairing all that has been allowed to decay or that hasn't been properly maintained. And then the second is to expand and make new investments in new production capacity. The first phase is possible in some places right now. Existing operators can take their footprint and expand it, improve it. Also, some of the existing infrastructure that the state oil company, PDVSA, is operating could be improved significantly. But then the next phase will involve building a lot of new investment in not just the production of oil from the oil fields, but then the upgrading of that oil into a kind of oil that's closer to the kind the rest of the world uses, a less dense, more free-flowing oil, using something called an upgrader.
Looking at the potential of Venezuelan oil, there's obviously some initial reluctance from companies, American companies, to get in there given all these challenges. But do you think that they eventually could see an upside, or there is just so much that has to change down there before they're willing to jump in?
Well, I think that the scale and the pace of new investment is going to depend a lot on the structure and stability of a post-Maduro transition. That's probably the biggest risk. One of the areas where there isn't much risk is that a lot of the oil has been found. 303 billion barrels of proved reserves are in the ground in Venezuela. Oil companies know how to manage risk when they understand what the risks are, and they know how to produce oil when there's oil to produce. If you're in the oil business, you go where the oil is, and there's oil there.
There's also oil in Iran. There are also protests in Iran. How much can that, or will that affect the price of global oil?
Well, one of the interesting things, Rich, is, of course, that with all that happened in Venezuela over the last week, the oil price didn't move very much. But Iran's a different story. We saw $13 a barrel in oil price increases during the conflict in June, and that was without any attacks or strikes that affected producing infrastructure or transportation of oil and natural gas in the region. If things go as they could go in Iran, you have turmoil across the country. Exports could be affected. If there's attacks against Iran, Iran retaliates against regional transportation or production, we could see very significant price moves to the upside.
And when you look at that, I mean, Iran, it's heavily sanctioned oil, but they do get oil through to a number of countries. How much of a player is Iran on the global oil market?
Well, if you think about the oil market as a little bit more than 100 million barrels per day of liquids consumption, which is the easy way to think about it, Iran's producing close to 3.5, a little bit more than 3.25 of that million barrels per day, and exporting about 2 million barrels per day. So very, very significant player in the world, even though a large proportion of that oil goes pretty much to just one place, which is China, who has functioned not just for Iran, but also Venezuela and Russia as a buyer of last resort for sanctioned crude.
Kevin Book, the Managing Director of ClearView Energy Partners. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.